We continue the Shiur Gemara. The Gemara says there are a number of places throughout Shas where the question is asked, what does a person have to do in order to get Olam Haba, in order to get Gan Eden? You find the Mishnah in Sanhedrin says every Jew has a chelik in Olam Haba, every Jew has Gan Eden, but that a Jew could lose his chelik by committing certain sins. Then we find different places in the Gemara where it says that a person who does a certain type of mitzvah gets a special, additional part in Olam Haba. For example, a person who walks even 4 amot in Eretz Yisrael has a special, extra Eretz Gan Eden for himself. A person is zocher to that 4 steps in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Nachman stresses that a Jew cannot really be a Jew as we call him. Rabbi Nachman calls him Ish HaYisraeli. It's not complete, cannot become complete until he goes to Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Nachman himself traveled to Eretz Yisrael at the greatest risk of his life, and in a place where other tzadikim did not succeed. For example, the Baal Shem Tov, who also risked his life but did not succeed in getting to Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Nachman did. He was zocher to get there, and he rose to the greatest heights. Such heights that he said that all he had achieved before going to Eretz Yisrael was as nothing compared to his achievement, his elevation in reaching Eretz Yisrael. Just the walking of 4 steps in Eretz Yisrael alone was enough to make him infinitely greater than before. That's one item. Secondly, the Gemara says too that those who bring simcha to others, they see people who are depressed, people who are sad, and they inject in them a feeling of simcha, a feeling of elation, to remove that ruach ra'ah, the evil spirit that depresses them. So these are people who deserve 2 special Gan Eden. Then the Gemara says flatly, how does a person know himself? How can a person detect in himself whether he's going to get Olam Haba? Because no person knows what we call the score. A person might think that he has a mountain full of mitzvot, and actually the Gemara says that a person might have committed 1 sin which could have erased all those mitzvot. For example, a person that has a lot of mitzvot piled high commits 1 sin of Lashon Hara, openly, which means embarrassing a person publicly. And this way he could lose his mitzvot and he can take over the other person's sins. He thinks that he has a world full of mitzvot. He comes to the Bet Din Shemala, the heavenly court, as for Shalom, he finds himself empty. Or a person might find the other way around. He might think he has nothing, and then he might have done certain mitzvot that are so precious in the eyes of heaven that he has much more. So how can a person really feel within himself whether he is a Ben Olam Haba? The Gemara says he cannot tell it himself. He can only detect it in one manner. If he sees that his rabbi has nachat from him, his rabbi is very pleased with him, then he knows definitely that in heaven too, this is a sign, a direct sign from heaven, that in heaven they are pleased with him too. Heaven, the heavenly court, Hashem is pleased with this person, and it manifests itself in the display by a person's rabbi. Now we come to a new case where this question was posed to the Chacham Mikol Adam, one who was known as the wisest of all men. They asked Shlomo HaMelech, you are the wisest of all men, tell us, who is a Ben Olam Haba? Which person can know that he is, which person can we know that he is the one that will have Gan Eden? And he replied, one who is given kavod, one who receives kavod for his knowledge, for his being an elder, a leader, an elder. If he receives kavod, well, we know that he is a Ben Olam Haba. This is one interpretation of his words. There are other interpretations we'll come to. But this is what it seems like from the pasuk that he answered. Kol shekeneged zekenav kavod. All that these zekenim, these elders, receive kavod. And of course, we know the Gemara says in Kiddushin that when we say an elder, does not mean an old Am Haaretz. The word zaken, the Gemara translates as ze kana chachma, person who has achieved wisdom, which means, as Rav Yossi says, yanik v'chakim, a child who is a prodigy, who is an ilui, who is very learned, a gaon in Torah, he is called a zaken too. We find that some of the greatest rabbis in the past were considered the oldest zakenim. The Vilna Gaon at the age of 6 was the greatest Gaon in the world at his time. At the age of 6, he was already a greater Talmid Chacham than most of the old rabbis living in that generation, and that was a generation of Gaonim. So too in the case of other great tzaddikim who excelled in their youth. So the word Zaken means one who is filled with Chochmat HaTorah, the wisdom of Torah. And we'll come back to this translation soon, because the Gemara here says, to illustrate this, the Gemara says that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi had a son. Yehoshua ben Levi, as we know, was one of those few who never passed away. He did not die. He went to Gan Eden without dying. When the Malach HaMavet came for him, he accompanied the Malach HaMavet to the gates of Gan Eden, and then he leaped into Gan Eden and escaped the process of death. And because of the fact that he was so great a tzadik, that he taught Torah to those who had leprosy without fear of the contagion, he was zochet to this great zechut of leaving the world without dying. One of 9 people have experienced this in history. Yehoshua Levi had a son. This is prior to that story. He had a son named Rav Yosef. It says one day Rav Yosef became very ill, fatally ill, and he passed away. A short time later, he came back to life. He was returned to life through a miracle, of course. And then his father spoke to him. Yehoshua Levi said to his son, when you passed away, what happened? He said, my soul went to heaven. He said, good. You recall what you saw? And he said, very vividly, very clearly, it remained with me. Sometimes a person has a dream, and he wakes up, he forgets completely what he dreamt. He doesn't recall any details. Person goes to sleep, his soul goes to heaven too. When his soul comes back, the person has no recollection at all of what the soul saw. A very great tzaddik who has a chizayon, a vision, or who actually experiences going to heaven, that tzaddik has a tie between the guf and the neshama, the body and the soul, where the soul relates to the body what the soul has seen. This, the Arizal describes his experiences of visiting heaven continually. He went to the different yeshivot in heaven, and everything that he saw, of course, he retained, because of the fact that the neshama and guf, soul and body of a tzaddik, are the same. A tzaddik purifies his body, soul, to the extent that it becomes as spiritual, as clean, as pure as a neshama. From my body I can see heavenliness. How? By purifying the body, removing all stains, all ta'avot, all desires, physical desires, gashmiut, from this material life, the body becomes as pure as the neshama. Of course, we once said, I want to see heavenliness, from Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. This study led us from Arizal. From there I see from his writings, from the Zohar Kadosh, which is Zohar means clear and it means light. From there we can see true heavenliness from the secrets of Kabbalah that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai revealed. So Rav Yosef, the son of Yehoshua ben Levi, was also this pure. He came back and said, I recall very clearly what I saw. Shmuel Levi said to him, fine, tell me, what did you see? So he answered, I saw a topsy-turvy world, a world that was upside down in heaven. He said, what do you mean? So he answered, well, I saw that all those that are on earth, very high, very elevated, very honored, in heaven, those are very low. They're very degraded. In other words, the very wealthy people here on earth who receive such kavod, such honor, so much respect, leaders, there in heaven they are considered as nothing. And the ones on earth who are very small, very low, looked down upon, the poor people, the beggars, the ones who sit in the corner in the shul and say Tehillim all day, those who are ignored, those are the ones that in heaven are considered royal. They are given regal honors there. And Yeshua ben Levi said, you did not see a topsy-turvy world. You saw a true, clear world. You saw the world of truth. It is down here on earth where things are upside down as they should not be. Here you see people who are not good, but who are given special respect and honor because of their wealth. You see people who are pure, who daven, learn with kavanah, people who serve Hashem purely, but they're very poor. They are ignored. In heaven, they are recognized for their true value, their true worth. You saw a land, a world of truth. Now tell me, did you see us there? Did you see our future there? Did you see our place in heaven? What are we like there? Or what are we considered? You hear speaking about us. Yosef answered, yes, I saw in heaven that we are as much valued, as much respected as we are down here. Rabbi Shmuel Levi was a chief rabbi. Of course, in those days, the tzadikim, the chachamim were given the proper degree of kavod for Torah. So his son said, just as we are given kavod on earth, so too are we regarded with the highest esteem, greatest respect in heaven. And he said, I also heard the famous motto, the famous saying in heaven, Ashrei, fortunate, blessed is he who comes here, who arrives in heaven. That means when he passes away, arrives in heaven with the learning, with the study of Torah. He who has studied Torah on earth and comes with all his learning, that means he did not stop the study of Torah, he did not forget his Torah. He maintained a consistent attendance to classes of Torah, maintained a shir kavua, a set time each day to study Torah. He comes to heaven with this set schedule. All the Torah that he has learned, he reviewed that which he learned, not to forget it. Ashrei to that person. In addition, one thing more. I heard them saying that, what about the top level in Gan Eden? Who gets that top level that is so high that other people, even tzadikim, cannot even look at them? The light is too bright. These are made for those Jews who are killed by the government, the evil governments, those who die al Kiddush Hashem. Those reach this top level in Gan Eden. Who are they? The Gemara says, shall we say this means Rabbi Akiva and the other rabbis, the Asara Haruge Malchut, the 10 rabbis who were killed by the Romans because they studied Torah? And the Gemara says, definitely not. Rabbi Akiva and his friends, the other great rabbis, got to the top level without the mitzvah of dying for their religion. This refers to others, not just those who were killed, but those who are killed in a true Kiddush Hashem. And for example, the Gemara says, those who were killed in the city of Lud. The Gemara tells the story of these two brothers. One was Lulinus, the other was Pappus. These two brothers, two Jews, simple, pure Jews, who lived in the city of Lud. And one day, the Gemara says that the daughter of the Roman king was found dead, murdered. Of course, she was killed by the Romans, but a bilbul, a false accusation came out against the Jews that the Jews had murdered the princess. This is, as we have seen throughout all generations, these blood accusations against Jews. When the Romans came to the city of Lud, the soldiers, and they said, "We want the murderers of this princess, or else we're going to wipe out every single Jew in this large city, one of the largest cities in Israel." The Jews were terrified. They knew this accusation was false. How could they surrender murderers if there are not any among them? The soldiers are ready to attack the Jews, destroy them, when these two brothers, Linus and Pappus, arose and said, "What do you want from the Jews? They're innocent, all of them here. We confess to the fact that we are the murderers of the princess. We'll stand the trial, we'll accept the penalty for it." So these two innocent Jews took upon themselves the mitzvah of Hatzalat Nefashot, saving the lives of all the Jews there, plus the fact that they were killed by the Romans, innocently, killed for the sake of being Jews. It is these two that the Gemara refers to now as being at the very top level of Gan Eden. Now, this story the Gemara tells about Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Shimon Levi, is meant as an illustration of the reply of Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon. He said, "Who is a Ben Olam Haba?" The one that receives kavod for being an elder in Torah. Which means, like Rabbi Shimon Levi said to his son, how are we considered in heaven? And he answered, just as we have kavod here for being leaders of Torah, so do we have kavod there. Now, this is one interpretation. The second one is accepted by halacha. The answer was, Kol shekeneged zekenav kavod. More directly, the wording. Which person is truly a ben olam haba? Which person richly deserves to get Gan Eden? Only if he has this habit, this nature, this mitzvah. Otherwise, he cannot get Gan Eden. The one who is keneged zekenav kavod, one who learns to be modest himself and to show the utmost respect, the necheretz, for the zekenim, for the elders of Torah. A person who has this attitude of deep kavod, deep respect for Torah, that person is a ben olam haba. And this fits in clearly with the statement of the Gemara that those who have azut, chutzpah, against the Talmid Chacham, as the Mishnah says, az panim legehinom. One who is an az panim, one who has chutzpah against Lomdei Torah, he is one for a product for Gehinom. The contrary, one who is keneged zekenav kavod, one who gives kavod to Torah, to the elders, to the Talmidei Chachamim, that person is assured of being a ben olam haba. And this was the reply of Shlomo HaMelech. The Gemara says that the mother of the Roman governor who ruled over Eretz Yisrael, this was after the Churban Bet HaMikdash. The Romans had destroyed Eretz Yisrael, and generations later they ruled over it. The her name was Ifra Hurmiz. Ifra means she possessed beauty, and who was friendly to the rabbis of the Gemara. Especially the Gemara brings a number of places that she liked Dava for his wisdom. She was in the habit of sending money for tzedakah to the rabbis of the Gemara. The Gemara says that one time she sent 400 dinars, it's a very expensive coin, let's say it's $40,000, $100 bills. a large sum of money. She sent it to Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami was one of the chief rabbis of the Amoraim that time, and Rabbi Ami refused this money, refused to accept it, though it was dangerous. Refusing the Roman governor's mother, it could incense her, could infuriate her. He refused it because he said, I will not accept money, charity, from a goy. So she went and sent this money to Rava. Rava accepted it. His motive was to keep peace with the kingdom. We have Shalom Malchut. It's very important. Jews must always try to keep at peace with the leaders of the land. Rabbi Ami heard about this. He became very angry about the fact that the Rava had accepted the money after he had turned it down. And he said, doesn't the Rava know there is a pasuk in Yeshayahu Hanavi which says, B'yavosh kitzirat tishaberna, that the Goyim rule over us now. They have the ruling power, but their ruling power is temporary. What keeps them up? The fact that they have a slight touch of mitzvot, slight drop of mitzvot. When this drop wears out, when it dries up, this becomes completely dry, these goyim, these empires will be completely destroyed. Now, therefore, when they send money for tzedakah, why add to their mitzvot? We want to destroy them, and not to give them the opportunity to add to their mitzvot and prolong their leadership, their ruling power. In that case, why did Rava accept this money from Ifra Hulmis? Yemena says Rava accepted it because of Shalom Malchut. He had to keep peace with the government. Therefore, he was forced to accept it. Yemena says Rabbi Ami too knew about this. Why didn't he accept it for Shalom Malchut? Because he felt that if he refused it, she would send it to somebody else. Let somebody else do it, but not someone as important as Rava. That's why he was angry at Rava. Now, knowing though that it was accepted for the sake of Shalom Malchut, which is very vital for the existence of the Jews, why then was Rabbi Ami angry at Rava? Rava's motive was a pure one. Even in instance that Rabbi Ami felt that if he had to accept it for the sake of keeping peace, then at least he should have taken that money and distributed it among the poor goyim, for the mitzvah is much smaller. Not to give it out among the Jews. A poor person, the Jew, receives money for tzedakah, it's a very big mitzvah. Why give the goyim so great a mitzvah? But the Yemena answers, it just so happens that's exactly what Rava did. That money he received, he gave only to the poor goyim, impoverished goyim in his community. So the Yemena says, then why was Rabbi Ami angry if he did exactly as he himself would have done? The Yemena answers, Rabbi Ami heard the story of Rava receiving this money, accepting it, but they did not finish the story. They did not tell him the fact that Rava had distributed among the poor goyim, and therefore, without hearing the end of the story, he became angry. The truth was, though, that Rava did exactly as Rabbi Ami himself would have done, to avoid giving extra credit, extra mitzvah to the goyim, distributed the money among the poor goyim. And of course, this is the source, this is the makor, the origin of the din in Shulchan Aruch, where so many people today argue so vehemently about this point, that there are some institutions, Jewish institutions, we won't say yeshivot, things like that, but there are Jewish institutions that go out collecting money. They need charity, they need tzedakah to live on, to exist on, and they accept checks from politicians or from ordinary wealthy goyim. They accept checks for the institutions. How can they accept money from goyim when the din is so clearly stated in the Gemara that a Jew should avoid accepting any charity from goyim? And as it's stated here, it is mentioned in much stronger terms in Shulchan Aruch, that how forbidden it is for a Jew to accept tzedakah from a goy, whether it's for an organization, an institution, a yeshiva, or even an individual poor Jew should not approach goyim so as not to give them that zechut. This is something that apparently is very difficult to live up to in America, because the yeshivot today are in such dire financial straits for a number of reasons. It seems that the establishment, so-called, refuses to help them, and so in desperation they must turn to any source of income. Altogether, it's a pitiful state, and we have to hope and pray that people become more aware of the mitzvah of tzedakah, that Jews should learn to help their own. The Gemara tells further the case of Binyamin HaTzadik, who was appointed over the collection of tzedakah. He was known as Binyamin HaTzadik, and people brought their tzedakah to him. As we mentioned previously, the greatest mitzvah of tzedakah is when you give tzedakah to a gabbai, to one who collects money for tzedakah, and he distributes it among the poor. You don't know exactly to which person the money goes to. The person doesn't know exactly where it came from. That's the highest mitzvah of matan b'seta. But you have to have one who is reliable in collecting the money. Well, you know that every penny goes to tzedakah, and it's distributed to the right type of people, the right type of aniyim. The Binyamin HaTzadik was one who was appointed, recognized as a tzaddik. And one time, during a year of famine, a woman came to him, and she said to him, "Rabbi, please feed me. Give me money for food." And he said to her, "I vow, I give you my word, that there is not 1 cent in the kuppah, in the collection in tzedakah. There's nothing at all left." So she said to him, "Rabbi, if you don't feed me, a woman, that's herself, and her 7 sons are going to die of hunger." It's no exaggeration. They have no food at all. We'll all die of hunger unless you feed us. So Binyamin HaTzadik went, strived himself, took his own money, his own food, and he fed her. He saved the lives of this woman and 7 children. Sometime later, he became very sick. He became so ill that he reached the point where he was about to pass away. At that moment, the Gemara says that the angels came before Hashem. They started to cry. They said, "Hashem, you wrote in the Torah, any person who saves 1 Jewish life, it is as though he saved a whole world." This the Gemara says in Sanhedrin. The fact that Hashem created only 1 person at the time of creation. He created a lot of everything. There was more than 1 animal, more than 1 tree, more than 1 rock. Everything was a multitude. But in humans, there was only 1 single person. He created Adam Yachid, alone. Why? They show that 1 human being is considered an entire world. The whole world we have today are descendants of Adam. So if a person kills 1 single human being, it is considered not that he killed 1, but that he killed a whole world. If someone would have killed Adam, we'd have no one living today. That means it's as though that person would have killed every single person alive today. By the same token, too, if a person saves a life, it means he has saved not 1 life, but a whole world, because when that person comes forth, more people, children, grandchildren, these multiply into an entire world. So saving 1 single life, it's as though he would have saved the life of Adam, and then came forth the whole world. So since the angel said to Hashem, since you wrote that one who saves 1 Jewish life is as though he saved an entire world, Binyamin HaTzadik, who saved the lives of a woman and 7 children, why should he die so young? Where is the reward for saving a life? Isn't there a life for a life? doesn't he deserve to live longer for the mitzvah and saving their lives? Immediately, the decree in heaven that sealed his fate was torn up. It was destroyed, and they added years to his life. The Gemara says, how many years did they add to his life? Exactly 22 more years. He lived 22 years longer than was his fate. Because of the fact that he had saved the lives of these people, he had 22 years more to live. Why exactly 22? Because we know that there are Chaf Bet Atvan Deoraita. The Torah consists of 22 letters. The Aleph Bet is 22 letters, and if you take the whole Torah, the Chumash, the Gemara, the Kabbalah, the Shulchan Aruch, every single Jewish sefer, every facet of the Torah, no matter where you turn, what page you turn to, what sentence you turn to, what word you have, it still consists of these same 22 letters in different forms. The Torah is infinite, yet in all its infinity, it is still these 22 letters that compose the letters, the words of the Torah. So, because he obeyed the mitzvah of the Torah, saving a Jewish life, which means to expend the possibility of so many more Jews studying Torah, therefore he deserved the life that was comparable to the letters of the Torah. 22 additional years. In addition to, of course, the question was, it was not stated clearly, but how old was Binyamin tzadik when this happened? At what age did he become ill? The Mefarshim say he must have been 35 years old, at least, because the pasuk says that the Sha'im lo yechatzu yamehem. The evil do not live to half of their life. The Gemara says it about Bil'am Harasha. Bil'am Harasha died at the age of 33. The lifespan of a person is 35. Bil'am Harasha died at the age of 33, not to reach half of his lifetime. Now, therefore, he must have lived to the age of 35, Yamin Tzadik, to show that he had left the category of Rasha. Now, together, why was the 22 years added to this then? Because 22 years more makes 57. He was Mikayim, the mitzvah, providing for these Jewish people, the woman and her 7 sons. This was an act that mitzvah that is so great. This is an act of Hashem giving parnasah. Hashem is zan et akol. Hashem provides nourishment, food for others. This Yemin Tzadik did, zan is nun zayin 57. Because he provided the food, the mizonot, for the woman and 7 children, therefore he is zocher to live the additional number of years to reach the number of 57. The Gemara says there was a story with Mumbaz Hamelach, King Mumbaz, who was one of the later kings of the Chashmonaim. He was a good king, obviously, and we must keep in mind the fact that kings were very wealthy. We speak about a king's ransom or royal treasures in the palace. They had special rooms, large storage rooms where they kept these royal treasures, the conquest, the loot from other countries, chests filled with silver and gold, gems. One day this Mumbaz went down to the treasure storage room. He took all the royal treasures out, all these chests of treasures, and just squandered them, spent them to the last penny, completely emptied the vaults. We're speaking, of course, of an extremely large sum. He spent all this distributed among the poor people in Israel. When his relatives heard about this, they came to him with an outcry, tremendously angry, and they screamed at him and they said to him, your fathers before you amassed these treasures. You didn't get these treasures by yourself. You didn't earn them. You didn't battle for them. You inherited all this. Your fathers worked so hard to assemble all this money, and you went and spent it and squandered the entire thing. So Mumbaz answered, it is not true. Because, the contrary, my forefathers, gathered a lot of treasures, and they hid them. They deposited them. Where did they deposit them? Below. Below means in the basement, the sub-basement. Basement meaning below the heavens. They deposited them on earth. I deposited all that money in heaven. Where is it safer? My forefathers deposited the money in a place where there is a risk of theft, a risk of plunder. The enemy can always attack. They might be able to remove all these treasures. I deposited in a place where no enemy hand can ever reach this money. Third, my forefathers deposited something which brings no profits and no dividends. It lays there dormant. I deposit it in a place where there are constant dividends, constant profits, constant fruit from this labor. Also, my forefathers deposited money. I deposited lives. In heaven, there are all these lives, the poor that I have saved, are deposited in heaven on my record. Who has done wiser? My forefathers deposited in Olam Hazeh, this world, and I deposited everything in Olam Haba. Now tell me which one is the wiser of the two. Of course, we must realize that the wisdom of Mumbaz HaMelech, not just as a king, it's a lesson for every single Jew. Think of where your money accomplishes more. In the first savings bank, 6% deposits, or in stocks at 12%, or in the bank of heaven, where the fruit of this principle, the dividends, are constant and eternal. They last forever and ever, plus the interest being paid at a high rate on earth itself. A person should think of that when he gives charity, not to feel that he has lost the money. He'll never see it again. It's something that besides the mitzvah, he also knows that he'll be reaping the benefits of this money forever afterwards. One point, though, by the way, of course, the question, the Gemara says that a person, when he spends or squanders money for tzedakah, should do so up to 20% of his possessions. He should not squander more, because it might necessitate his going out to collect charity, which is wrong. This, of course, means a person who cannot afford more than that. A person who lives from hand to mouth should not give more than 20%. A person who's very wealthy can afford to give more than that, and certainly he should. Or, as the Sephadim say, a person who's very sick physically would not hesitate to give a professor, a surgeon, half of his wealth, or all of his wealth, to cure him if he knows that he's very seriously ill. A person who knows that his neshama is very sick, he's committed very serious sins, he wants to get these sins erased by giving a lot of tzedakah, that person is justified giving more than 20% and more than half of his wealth to cure the serious illness of his neshama. In this case, though, the question still remains, how come that Mumbaz HaMelech gave so much, more than 20%, and more than 50%, in fact, all that he had? The answer is that there was no problem of Mumbaz HaMelech starving. No question, no fear of being poor. Because if the king distributes everything he has, it is still the duty of the populace, duty of the people in the kingdom, to keep the king wealthy above the wealth of any other single individual. There was no fear here of his distributing too much tzedakah and remaining impoverished. That's why, of course, he was allowed, but doing it with such a wisdom. Secondly, the investment that Munbaz HaMelech made, this teaches us too the true emunah. We always state that emunah is something that you cannot see, something that you do not know clearly in your mind. No person, contemporarily, let's say today, no person has actual experience in seeing Gan Eden. We learn about it, we read about it, but that too is emunah. We believe in Hashem, we believe in the Torah, we believe in the tzadikim. That's still emunah. A case of emunah that is so strong that a person is willing to base his physical, that which he sees. There's nothing more physical, material than cash. Cash that you see the value of with your eyes. You're willing to transfer that, your knowledge, to complete emunah, deposit it in heaven, something which you don't see. That shows a test of the person's emunah being as strong as his yediyah. That's the highest degree of emunah. And this is what Munbaz HaMelech taught by showing that he gave all his money to tzedakah, which means that there was no shadow, trace of doubt in his mind as to the truth, the words of the Torah, that the money is deposited in heaven. There is sechar, there is olam haba, there is Gan Eden for this. This is what every person should strive for, not just the giving of tzedakah itself, but the giving of tzedakah with that pure emunah. And that's why, too, the Arizal brings the pasuk by Avraham Avinu, v'he'emin b'Hashem v'yachshaveha lo tzedakah. Arizal says that the mitzvah of tzedakah is so great, and yet it is tied with emunah. That if a person has emunah, v'he'emin b'Hashem, a person has pure emunah in Hashem, he gets a mitzvah for emunah. But how do you translate, how do you interpret the word emunah, and what type of schar is there for emunah? Arizal says this pasuk shows us that the mitzvah of tzedakah is one of the mitzvot that receive the most schar reward possible. The mitzvah of emunah is on that level. A person who has pure faith receives the reward for a person who gives tzedakah. These two are parallel, emunah and tzedakah. Of course, according to the Sufrei Kabbalah, emunah and tzedakah are one and the same. That's the malchut. Malchut, of course, means the Shekhinah, to elevate the honor of Hashem, the Shekhinah, spirit of Hashem. A person who has emunah, that brings a kavod shamayim, kavod Hashem. Emunah means too is the malchut. He elevates the malchut of Hashem. A person who gives tzedakah, that means he removes the poverty from the ani, takes away this aniyut from the ani. This, the Zohar Kadosh says, the letter in Hebrew for ani, poverty, is dalet. The letter dalet means dalut, or poverty. Or dalet, dalet la, klum. It has nothing of its own. A person with emunah fills this dalet, injects the knowledge. The emunah is strong as knowledge. He injects the knowledge, which is the letter yud. Place the yud into the dalet, and you have the letter hey, which is the last letter of Hashem's name, or the malchut. So we see where tzedakah is the inyan of emunah. Let us hope that we'll be zochet to this true emunah, zochet to have this emunah in Hashem, the Torah and tzadikim, to fulfill the mitzvah of tzedakah v'shleimut, and in that zchut we'll see the tzidkat of Hashem with us, by being mezakeh us to see the binyan bet hamikdash, b'yad Yoel Tzedek, Mashiach Yitchenu v'Hei Avinu, Amen, Amen. We continue the shiur in Gemara. The Gemara says that we always had, during the time of the Bet HaMikdash, there was something known as nevuah, the power of prophecy. And nevuah itself means that a person, a human being, a tzadik, spoke the words of Hashem that were given to him directly from heaven, placed into his mouth. He transmitted these words as a messenger of Hashem. The word Navi means speak. Niv Svatayim. He speaks, but they're not his words. He speaks as a messenger, giving over the words of Hashem to people. Now, the power of Nevu'ah stopped with the Churban Bet HaMikdash. We had no Nevi'im after that. The Gemara says, from the time that the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, that time on, the Nevu'ah, the prophecy, the power of prophecy was taken from the Nevi'im, and it remained only in the hands of the Chachamim, the wise sages, the rabbis of the Jews. They still retain this power of prophecy. How? Because, note, if we take the date of the lives of the rabbis of the Gemara, they lived much later, most of them lived much later than the time of the Bet HaMikdash. Many of the Tanaim and all of the Amoraim, later rabbis of the Gemara, lived way after the Churban Bet HaMikdash. And yet these rabbis also spoke the word of Hashem, because, again, basically, the Yesod Emunah, foundation of our Emunah, our faith, is the Torah min Hashemayim. The Torah was given from heaven. The Torah was given by Hashem. The word Torah means the written Torah and the Torah Shebal Peh, the Tanakh, Torah Nevi'im Ktuvim, and the Gemara. The Gemara too is the word of Hashem. As the Gemara itself tells us, Gemara Shkalim, that even the Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah, the Gemara itself, also was actually written originally. Hashem gave the Luchot, the tablets, to Moshe Rabbeinu. What was carved out on those tablets? Every single word in the Torah, written and oral, every single din that exists in the Torah was carved out on those tablets between the space of each one of the commandments. How so many words could fit in so small a space, there's no question. It's very simple. The Luchot were heavenly, and heaven is Lemala min hamakom. It's above the concept or the dictates of space. For example, the Bet HaMikdash too, being so holy, was not ruled, was not governed by the laws of space. As the Mishnah says, all the Jews could assemble in the yard of the Bet HaMikdash. There was enough room for all the Jews collectively to bow, with 6 feet of space for each one. How could millions of Jews fit into a yard that was so small, just a few hundred feet wide, and everyone to have 6 feet of space? The answer is that where there is Kedusha, it is not limited, it's not restricted by the rules of space. Where the Kedusha is still higher, and it's not governed by space whatsoever. For example, the Aharon, Eina Min Hamidah. The Gemara says that in the Kodesh Kodeshim, in the Holy of Holies, we had the 2 kiruvim, 2 figures of the kiruvim, the wingspan that covered the entire width of that room, exactly to the millimeter of an inch. And where did the Aron Kodesh stand? Between these 2 kiruvim. How much space was there between these 2 kiruvim? 0. Not 1,000th of 1 inch. Yet the entire Aron stood there between these 2, which means there was no law of space. It was completely heavenly. And so too, the Luchot, which were holy, were not governed by space, so that all the words of the Gemara could fit into the Luchot, the tablets. The point is, though, that the Gemara says this teaches us that Hashem gave to Moshe Rabbeinu every word of Torah that will be revealed in the future. All these statements that the rabbis of the Gemara will state, all the statements that the later rabbis will say, all the statements that are brought out even today in our time as Chidushei Torah, new ideas, new concepts, and chidushim, interpretations of Torah, and all the future generations, till the end of time, every single thing that relates to Torah was taught to Moshe Rabbeinu, so that he was Rabban Shel Kol Yisrael. He knew all the Torah that every Jew would ever know. Since the words of the Gemara are the words of Hashem, therefore we can understand how when the Gemara says the prophecy remained with the Chachamim, the rabbis of the Jews. The rabbis of the Gemara make statements. What statements do they make? The words of Hashem, just as the prophets of old did. This is what the Gemara says. The prophecy was taken from the Nevi'im, but it remained with the Chachamim. On this there is a machloket. Rabbi Yochanan says, I state that when the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, the Nevuah was taken from the Nevi'im, the actual Nevuah. Nevuah translating as a prophecy, as a prediction of the future. But the Nevuah still existed. Hashem did not remove the power of the Nevuah from the world. So where is that Nevuah found today? Today it is found among two types of people. One, the shotim, the fools, the morons, the insane. And second, among the tinokot, the children, small children. These gems, statements that small children come out with, unwittingly, unknowingly, their mouths are filled with these words of prophecy. So from a child you may hear a true prophecy that would have come from an actual Navi in the time of the Bet HaMikdash. And the Gemara says to cite an example, illustration of this. First, to show that the fools contain the power of prophecy. Then it says that Baravashi was Rav Ashi's son. He was just about the last of the rabbis of the Gemara. One day he was walking in the marketplace of the city of Chuzah, and he heard a fool mumbling. He overheard this fool saying that the head of the yeshiva, the chief rabbi in the city of Mechesia, will be one who signs his name Tavyumi. Rabbi Ravashi heard this, and he thought to himself, he made a very fast calculation. As far as he knew, nobody else signed his name Tavyumi but Rabbi Ravashi himself. In fact, Ravashi too is their family name. So he said, this is a prophecy. It comes from a fool. Prophecy is hidden. But I have overheard this. That means that I'm going to become the chief rabbi. I must do something about securing that position as long as it's fated for me. While he was going to the city, the rabbis in the city were having a conclave, a meeting, to decide whom to appoint as chief rabbi. They decided perhaps they would select Rav Acha. Now, they wanted to get the consent of Rabbi Ravashi, whom they considered very high authority, to get his opinion. So they sent two rabbis to him to question him, to bring back his reply. When they came to him, he involved them in a discussion. He detained them. These two rabbis didn't come back, so they sent two more rabbis to him. He detained those two also. They sent until he had a total of 10 rabbis with him. He told them to sit down, and he started to speak words of Torah, the laws of the holidays, which meant, when he did that, automatically it meant his entry into the position of chief rabbi, of Rosh Yeshiva. There's a rule that in order to receive smicha, degree of rabbi, it required 3 rabbis to get the degree from. In order to receive the degree of Rosh Yeshiva, it required 10. Now that he had an assemblage of 10 rabbis, by delivering a derashah, a lecture on the laws of Yom Tov, this proclaimed him as chief rabbi. When Rav Acha heard this, he conceded the victory to Rabbi Ravashi. The Gemara says this proves, though, that the prophecy, this was a true prophecy coming from the mouth of a fool. This illustrates the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. The second, the case of children. But first, it's important to note that there are different interpretations of this also. Just to say that a fool A person who's completely dumb has the power of delivering a prediction that will come true more so than a wise person. It's difficult to accept that face value. Other interpretations of this, others who say Rabbi Yochanan meant something else. Rabbi Yochanan said that the nevuah is in the hands of the fools and the children. What he meant was the nevuah referring to what we said before. Nevuah means words of Torah. A person who comes out with chidushei Torah, new ideas, new interpretations of Torah, chidushim, that person is delivering words of nevuah, the words of Hashem. Where will you find that power of nevuah today? In the hands of the fools and the children, which means fools do not speak and children do not speak. That is, their words are meaningless. They're not accepted as speech. So this means that a person who conducts himself with silence, who leads his life one of silence, he doesn't speak any additional words. He has shmirat halashon. He will never speak words that are bad, evil, lashon hara. He will never speak even dvarim b'telim, words that are futile, wasted, that are not holy, not concentrated on pure kedusha. One like that is one that is fit, that from him shall come forth new ideas in Torah. This is what Rabbi Yochanan meant. However, the Gemara says now to illustrate another case where we said that children too have the power of prophecy. And of course, this statement about children we find confirmed in the Zohar HaKadosh. Zohar HaKadosh says that Arizal was once standing at the gates of Lud with some of his students, and he overheard a child make a statement about the future of the Jews, in reference to the Roman government. Arizal said, this child has spoken the truth, because B'chol Banayach Limudei Hashem. According to Kabbalah, Limudei Hashem are the two Sefirot, Netzach and Hod. And we know that the Nebuah comes from these two Sefirot, Netzach and Hod, B'chol Banayach, and the children shall come with the lessons of Hashem, which are the Nebuah, the prophecy. The two kiruvim, the Ben Shnei kiruvim, that Arizal says also, the kiruvim, Netzach and Hod, the foundations of Nebuah. And he really gives us this illustration of a case of a child being able to predict the future. Ones were told me are very familiar. He really tells us that Rav Chisda was once sitting, and his small daughter was sitting on his lap. In front of him were sitting two of Rav Chisda's students, Rava and Rami Bar Chama. Rav Chisda liked these two students very much. They were leading rabbis in the Gemara. They were both very young at the time. Rav Chisda said to his daughter, sort of in jest, she was a very small child, and he said to her, tell me, which one of these two will you want in the future? Which one would you like to marry? And very quickly, now this exchange came very fast. You got to grasp this quickly. She answered immediately, one word, both. Immediately, too, the Rava said, I am last. He understood that this was a prediction. She said both. A child said it would come true. Which means she'd marry first one and then the other. Now, in order to do that, something has to happen to her husband. The Rava said, rather than be the first one, something should happen to him. He said, rather, I'm last. Rami Bar Chama would marry her first, then, after she would be separated from Rami Bar Chama, after her marriage would terminate, would end, then Rava would marry her. He would not be in danger anymore, because this prophecy had to be fulfilled. So let's analyze what the problem was when he said last. She said both. That was a prophecy. This was going to happen. She was going to marry both of them in succession. So here the case was, he knew that a marriage could terminate one of two ways. A woman becomes free from her husband, the Mishnah says, either through a get, a divorce, or through mitat haba, the first Mishnah condition. Either through divorce or through the death of her husband. This way she becomes free be able to marry someone else. So Rava figured, if I say I'm last, that means that I am not wishing any harm on Rabbi Nachman. I'm not wishing he should die. I'm just saying that she will end the marriage through divorce. No harm will come to him. They'll be divorced. She'll be permitted to marry again, and she'll marry me. This was Rava's figure. This was his theory. That's why he said last. The question is, though, why didn't Rabbi Nachman say last? Why did he jump to state, to beat Rava to it and say last, that should be the first one? With these same calculations. Let Rava marry her, and let it end in divorce, then he would marry her afterwards. The answer is that we have a machloket in the Gemara as to which is worse. A man has to marry. He has a choice of two women. Which is the worse of the two? A widow, woman whose husband has died, or a divorcee, woman whose husband is still alive, but she is permitted to marry. She is no longer married to him. Which of the two should he marry? Which one is the worse of the two to stay away from? There are two opinions. One says that a widow is worse because of the fact that she did not lose her husband out of dislike. She still cared for him, and she'll still think about him. That, of course, is a minor reason. The Zohar Kadosh gives us a much deeper reason. The Sava Kadisha, the Avieva Sava, the Zohar Kadosh tells us that the danger prevalent in marrying a widow is such that the second husband's life is literally in danger. Because when a man dies, part of him remains on earth, attached to his wife. Part of his nefesh, his soul. And any person who marries this woman will find the nefesh of her first husband a formidable enemy who will try to destroy him. The second husband is powerful. That means he's very holy. His neshama is very holy. He'll be able to overcome the spirit of the first husband. If he is not that powerful, even if he is equal to the first one, the spirit in its form, the form of the spirit, is much stronger than a human being living, and therefore it will drive away this second husband, drive what means to kill him. That's why we find in the Gemara the question about Nashim, Isha Katlanit, a woman who was a killer. Her husband dies, she marries a second one dies, and then she's not allowed to marry again. The third time he goes, we are sure that the third husband will die too. Why? Because this proves that the first husband's nefesh is a very strong one. So this is a reason, this is the reason in Zohar Kadosh. The Gemara gives a lighter reason, was we said why a widow is worse than a divorcee. The other opinion is that a divorcee is worse. It's better to marry a widow than a divorcee. Logically so, because a divorcee is a woman who still may be thinking of her first husband. He is still alive. She might still desire him. And this is very unhealthy for a marriage. Therefore, the Gemara says, stay away from a divorcee. Now, this debate were the opinions of Rava and Rabbi Nachman. Rava felt that he would rather marry a divorcee than risk marrying a widow. So Rava said, I'm last. Without wishing Rabbi Nachman any harm, I'm willing to marry a divorcee, let Rabbi Nachman live, divorce his wife, the daughter of Chisda, and I will marry her as a divorcee. Rabbi Nachman did not want that. He did not want to say last for two reasons. To say last, he should marry a widow, he didn't want to wish death upon Rava. To say last, he should marry her as a divorcee, this he definitely would not do. Because he maintained the opinion that a divorcee is much worse than a widow, and therefore he would not marry a divorcee under any conditions. The only alternative left to him was he would have to marry her first, and then divorce her, and Ava would eventually marry her. Now, interestingly, or let's say amazingly, there is a sequel to this story. It's not mentioned here. Those who learn the Gemara Yevamot is the actual sequel to this story. And what's strange about it is that in those days it was permissible for a man to marry more than one wife. In fact, the Ava himself was the one who said a man should not marry more than 4 wives. Up to 4 wives is permissible, and not more. This is a statement by Ava, meaning he himself maintained that position. He held that rule. It is definitely permissible to marry more than 1 wife. Yet we find that Ava himself would not, under any conditions, himself marry more than 1 wife. He held that this is permissible, but not advisable. Permissible, but much better, much more advisable that a man not have more than 1 wife. And this, of course, was hundreds of years, more than hundreds of years, of course. It's closer to 1,000 years before the, not that many, 500 years before the Chedam of Rabbeinu Gershom. First time that we found the Isur forbidding the marriage of more than 1 wife by a man was Rabbeinu Gershom. Until then, there was no Isur against it. In fact, that Chedam was given only to the Ashkenazim. The Sephardim never got that Chedam. Despite this fact, this is a false illusion or a misconception on the part of most people who are under the impression that if they are Sfaradim, there never was anything wrong with marrying more than 1 wife. It was always permissible, l'chatchila. You may do it outright. Those who are Ashkenazim felt that this restriction, this ban was placed upon them by the Bnei Gershom. Prior to that, more than 1 wife was the fad, the custom. Everyone did. The truth is, the fact is that it was not so. Rashi HaKadosh states beferush, clearly, the Gemara, that the rabbis avoided, the days of the Gemara, they avoided strictly having more than 1 wife. That is, most of the rabbis in the Gemara. The majority avoided taking more than 1 wife because they felt that it was improper. Ava himself, who stated that a person may have as many as 4 wives, himself did not take more than 1 wife. And therefore, the Gemara tells us a story there, a sequel to the story, that Ami Bar Chana and the daughter of Rav Chisda, when their marriage terminated, she did not marry again. She waited 10 years before she married Rava. Those 10 years of waiting, that waiting period, was due to the fact that Rava was married at the time, and she waited patiently until his wife passed away. He would not take a second wife. She waited a full 10 years, and after Rava's wife passed away, then she married Rava. In fact, the Gemara brings there a whole discussion about, can a woman who's not married for 10 years, at a later age, have children? And Rav Chisda's daughter, Rava's wife, did bear him children. Rava jokingly said to her, the rabbis are whispering behind your back. How could you have children if you were not married for 10 years' time? After 10 years, the woman becomes infertile. She cannot bear children anymore. She said, those 10 years, if a woman gives up hope of remarrying, then she becomes barren. She becomes sterile. She cannot have children. But those 10 years, I did not give up hope for a minute. I kept on waiting, anticipating, expecting that I would eventually marry you, and therefore, since I did not give up any hope, it had no effect upon me physically. This is the sequel to the story where the daughter of Rav Chisda, as a child, predicted the fact that she would marry both Rava and Ami Bechama, and her prediction came true. This is proof to Rabbi Yochanan's statement that the power of Nevuah, prophecy, is found today among children. And the Gemara says that let us take the comparison of the different Sefarim of the Torah. We have what is known as Tanakh. Tanakh means Torah. That's the 5 Sefarim of Moshe Rabbeinu. Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim. Then we have, that's the Tat of Tanakh. The Nun stands for Nevi'im. That's the 8 books of the prophets. Then we have Ketuvim, later writings. That's the balance of 11 more Ketuvim. This totals 24. These are called the Chaf Daled, the 24 Sefarim of the Torah, of the written Torah, Torah Shebachtav. These 24 Sefarim, divided into 3 parts, Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, are not on the same level of Kedusha. The Torah, which means the Chumash, is considered holier than the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim. And when you have 2 types of Sefarim, one holier than the other, the Din says that it is forbidden to place a Sefer that is less holy upon a Sefer that is more holy. For example, the Chumash is the holiest of all these Sefarim. You are not allowed to place a Gemara on top of a Chumash that is desecrating the Kedusha of the Chumash. That's a Gemara, which is the later part of the Torah. You're not even allowed to place a Navi, a book of prophets, on top of a Chumash, because the Chumash is holier than the Navi. So now we come to a question: how about binding a Sefer where you have all 3 together? Before we get to this question and take it up in detail, let's first discuss that first rule. And this first rule, I would say, is a painful item. Painful because I have had some bitter experiences in the past where I had taught this to some of my students, and they studied in certain yeshivot, and they got into trouble on account of that due to, let's say, a lack of knowledge on the part of their superiors. Let's first state the facts that surround this. Let's take, for example, the Chumash, the Torah Shebachtav, and Torah Shebal Peh, the Gemara. Of the 2, the Chumash is considered holier because the Chumash is the basis, the Yesod, for all of Torah. The Gemara is based upon the Chumash. The Gemara says in Ta'anit, like a Miza Boraita. There's nothing that's found in the Gemara that's not found as a remez, hinted at, based on the Torah, the Chumash. Any of the other Sefarim, going from Chumash to Mishnah, to Gemara, to Kabbalah. The Arizal says these are 4 levels that correspond to the 4 different worlds. The Olam HaAsiyah, Olam HaYetzira, Olam HaBriya, Olam HaAtzilut. Though Olam HaAtzilut is the highest, corresponds to Kabbalah, still, all these worlds are still resting upon the bottom one, the main one, the Chumash. They're all based on the Torah. So, since the Chumash is the holiest of all Sefarim, comparing Chumash to Gemara, the Din says in Shulchan Aruch, Yoredeya, that it is forbidden to place a Gemara on top of a Chumash. There are people who are very careless when they have a lot of Sefarim. They just put it down on the table. They ignore looking at what they are placing there, and invariably they place one on top of the other, which should not be done so. So the Din says clearly that a Gemara cannot be placed on a Chumash, and this is a statement that's agreed upon by all the rabbis in the Shulchan Aruch. There is one opinion from one rabbi who states, his opinion, he says, that when is this rule said? Only a case of Torah, Chumash, that's written the Gelilah, which means a Sefer Torah. Written by hand, it has the Kedusha of Sefer Torah, which is much higher than a Chumash. In the case of a Sefer Torah, then we have the rule, you cannot place a Gemara on top of a Sefer Torah. But those Seferim that are printed, our Chumashim, are not written in a Gelilah scroll. Instead, it's just a printed Sefer, in a book form, and it's printed, it's not written by hand. It does not have the Kedusha of a Sefer Torah. Therefore, we are not particular about this law. It is permissible, he says, to place the Gemara on top of a Chumash if it's a printed one. Now, it is true there is a statement like that. One of the great poskim, one of the very great Gaonim of the past, recent past, that is, very recent, and there was a case, a controversy once in the yeshiva in this neighborhood, where some of these students who were taught this rule in the yeshiva refused to place the Gemara on top of the Chumash. And one of the heads of the yeshiva attacked these students mercilessly as Amei Haaretz because of the fact he maintained that the rule does not apply to Chumash. I won't go into the details, the sordid details, or the bloody details of the battle then, but I will say what the outcome legally is. Final word legally is, as the Zohar Kadosh says, the Tikuney Zohar, the Arizal, who go into this much more in detail. And we can understand that those rabbis of the Shulchan Aruch and Yeridea itself, who just write simply the rule, you cannot place Gemara on a Chumash, without differentiating between a Chumash and a Sefer Torah, they accept that rule flatly because of the fact that they follow the teachings of the Zohar Kadosh and Arizal, or the reason behind it, as the Zohar Kadosh tells us. The Torah Shebechtav, or let's put it first this way, everything that Hashem created in this world, bar none, the Zohar Kadosh says, comes in Zachar Unekeva. Everything is male and female. Whether it's humans, or animals, or even vegetation. Vegetation too. There are male and female types of vegetation, flowers and so on. In all cases, male and female represent the Mikabel and Mashpia. Mashpia means the one that nourishes, the one that provides. Kabel, the one that receives. The Zohar Kadosh says, for example, we call the Ashinim and the Anayim. Ashinim are Duchra, or Zachar, Anayim are Nukva, Nekeva. The Ashir, the rich man, gives. He is the Zachar, he's the provider. The poor man is called poor. He is in the form of Nekeva, the receiver. There's always the giver and the receiver that are called Zachar and Nekeva. This same thing applies too in the heavenly realm. According to Kabbalah, in heaven too, you'll have all the Sefirot, or all the heavens too, in the form of Zachar and Nekeva, not Chas v'Shalom, in a physical sense, Chas v'Shalom. We find it even in Hashem's name. You have the Shem, all mitzvot are done to unite. The Shem Yichud, to unite, Kucha B'Richu, Hashem, Ushchintei, and the Shekhinah. There too you have Kucha B'Richu Shchintei, means Hashem and his Malchut, his ruling power. That the Hashem HaMelucha, that the ruling power is in the hands of Hashem. But this Melucha, or Malchut, or Shekhinah, is always the Malka, the queen, the Nukva. The Kucha B'Richu is the Duchra. And we won't go into details on that, it's too deep a topic. But just suffice it to say that always there is the top, the upper level is the Zachar, lower level is the Keva. Very, very different than today's woman's lib opinion. This is in all cases. Spiritual, physical, animal, vegetation, everything is that in those two forms. Now, therefore, in the case too of the Torah, the Zohar Kadosh tells us that the Chumash, the Torah Shebechtav, is Duchra, is Zachar, Torah Shebal Peh is Nukva, Nekeva. I'm just saying this in one word. There are thousands of statements made about this in reference to the Vav K. Vav of Hashem's name is Torah Shebechtav, and the K is Torah Shebal Peh. Because the Torah is part of Hashem, the word of Hashem is Hashem. So that we see that the Torah Shebal the written Torah, is the Zachar, Torah Shebal Peh is the Nekeva. You can never twist these two around where the Nekeva should be above the Zachar. The Kabel should be above the Mashpia. The Zachar is the leader. He provides, the Torah Shebal provides the material for the Gemara. For the Keva, the Torah Shebal Peh. And that is why the Zohar Kadosh states emphatically, we're never allowed to turn these two over. Always the Torah Shebal must be on top of the Torah Shebal Peh. The Chumash must be placed on the Gemara as a symbol of that. Now, in this case, it's very clear and very, very obvious that this has nothing to do with whether it's written on the Sefer Torah or printed as a Chumash. Torah means the words of the Torah. Very clearly it means that a Chumash in any form must be on top of the Gemara and not the contrary. So with that axiomatic statement to preface it, we now come to a question the Gemara itself asks. Of course, the Gemara tells us this rule: you cannot place a sefer of lower level on top of a higher one. The Gemara asks, how about if you have combined in one single sefer, you have Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. You have, let's say, like the Bible, for instance. Or the Tanakh in one single sefer, the Chumash, and then the Navi, and then the Ketuvim. Are you allowed to bind it in one single volume? What's the problem? Fine, when the sefer is closed, you have Chumash on top, Navi under it, Ketuvim afterwards. When you're learning, you open the sefer, you turn the pages, eventually you're going to have Chumash on the bottom, Navi on top of it, which is wrong. Are you allowed to combine this? We have a machloket. Rabbi Meir says that it is permissible. You're allowed to do that. Rabbi Yehuda says that it is forbidden. You must have the Torah separately in a separate volume, the Nevi'im separate, Ketuvim separately. The Chachamim say that we do not even allow printing the Nevi'im together in one volume. Writing it in one volume, you have to have every Navi, every book of Navi in a separate volume. Every book of Ketuvim in a separate volume too. Now, basically, the reason for this machloket is not as we stated exactly. Tosafot says our problem is not the fact when you open the sefer, it's going to be one on top of the other. Because the rule of one on top of the other is, as the Rishonim explain, only when you have two different volumes. Then you cannot place one on the other. But if it's together in one single volume, then it is impossible to avoid that, and therefore it's permissible to, in one volume, to place one on the other, as we do today. We have Tanakh in one volume. The problem here is, though, is it right, for example, to a person wants to learn Navi? When he has one volume, he's got to turn past all the pages of Chumash. It's as though he was ignoring these and going to the Navi, which is a lower level of Kedusha. Is that permissible? Rabbi Meir says it is permissible. Yehuda says it is not, and that's how the law remains, of course. But this refers, again, only in this case, it refers to a scroll. When you have like a Sefer Torah, which is a scroll, you cannot get to the middle unless you turn and keep on turning, Yulila. That's disrespectful to all these dafim, all these pieces of parchment that you got to keep rolling until you get to the place you want. The way we have it today is if I didn't print it where you don't have to turn anything, you just open it right in the middle of one motion. That is permissible to have them combined. Torah Nevi'im Ketuvim. But the law does remain that you cannot have them in one scroll. That's why you'll never find a Sefer Torah with the back of it also written out the Haftorah, the Nevi'im. You have separate scrolls for the Nevi'im where they read the Haftorah. That's this machloket. And, of course, the question is about the writing of the Sefer Torah. Now, each one, as we said, must be done separately. The Torah itself separately, the Nevi'im separately, and there are places that don't even read Navi from a scroll in the Haftorah. Most of the Hasidic places just read it to themselves. There's no Baal Koreh who reads the Haftorah. Among the Chassidim, they don't read it. In Arizal's case, he said each one says it himself. In any event, we go back now to the problem with the Sefer Torah itself. The Gemara says, how is the Sefer Torah itself, which consists of the 5 Chumashim, from Bereshit until the Einei Kol Yisrael, how is that to be written? We know it's written by hand on separate pieces of parchment, then they are sewn together. Together this comprises one entire scroll. Is there a special rule about the size of this Sefer Torah, the size of this scroll? The Gemara says there is a rule. The rule is that the height of the Sefer Torah, the height of the scroll, let's say if it's 24 inches, then the circumference of the scroll enclosed should be exactly the same as the height of the scroll. If the scroll is 24 inches high, the circumference should be also exactly, put a string around the Sefer Torah, should be equal to exactly the height of the Sefer Torah. And the Gemara says that's not easy. To write a Sefer Torah should come out exactly the same number of parchments, same sheets, number of sheets that will come out to exactly the thickness will be the same as the height. It's very difficult to arrive at. That's why the Gemara says that one rabbi, Rav Huna, wrote 70 Sefer Torah. 70. That's a large number. And out of those 70, he finally got one that matched exactly. He had to find the thinness, the exact texture. The parchment should be equal to, when it's complete, it'll be equal to the height of the Sefer Torah itself. And it took him 70 Sefer Torahs right before he got that one. He mentions that Aharon ben Yaacov wrote one Sefer Torah on the skin of a calf, the calf skin, that happened to come out exactly right, the first one he wrote. This was so strange an incident that the rabbis all looked at him. They couldn't help it. They looked at him in amazement, and that's like giving an ayin hara. And therefore he passed away immediately from this look they gave him. That's how difficult it is. And to prove this point, how difficult it was for Rav Huna, the Gemara says that the rabbis told Rav Hamnuna that Rav Ami had written 400 Sefer Torahs. So he told him, no person can write that in a lifetime. No person can ever write 400 Sefer Torahs. What he must have written was the pasuk Torah, Siva Lana Moshe Morasha Kilat Yaakov. That pasuk is considered Torah in itself because it says when a child is born, the child begins to speak. The father should teach him that pasuk. That's called teaching him Torah. He must have written this pasuk 400 times, and that's what's meant by writing 400 Sefer Torahs. Now, the order or the trick of getting the Sefer Torah to be exactly the same circumference as height, this question was posed before the Rambam. And the Rambam writes in a Teshuvot Rambam to Rabbi Yonatan ben Hillel, the Dayan, judge who asked this question. He writes a long Teshuva in Teshuvot Rambam, that's Teshuvot Kuf Chav Hei, where he describes the technical aspects of getting it to be exact. He describes geometrically how it can be done. First, you should measure off the sheets of parchment and to write a certain number of words in each line, and it'll come out to exactly. If a person wants to find out the details, look into that.